Good morning. Welcome to Transportation Committee. We'll start to run through the agenda then. We have quorum in the room. Councillor Middick will not be with us this morning. We've received no declarations of interest. Can we confirm the minutes of March the 7th, 2018, please? Thank you. The first item on the agenda is the Albert and Slater Streets Post-LRT Repurposing, Functional Design, and Slater Street Realignment Environmental Assessment Study Recommendations. We have a staff presentation for that, so we'll hold that. And then we have a number 2 is an always stop control at the intersection of Joshua Street and Saddle Ridge Drive. And that is the agenda. So we will start with the staff presentation. Good morning, Dee. Are you ready to go?
Yes.
Perfect.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. We're here to present to you the redesign of Albert and Slater Streets between Empress and Waller. This is a very exciting project for us, and it's transformative. It's a follow-up to several of Council's strategic decisions that have been made in the past, including the TMP, the Complete Streets Policy, the Downtown Ottawa Urban Design Strategy, as well as the recent Downtown Moves Study. Next to me is Nelson Edwards, who is the City Project Manager, one of the 2 project managers on this file. In the audience is Vanessa Black, who had led the section for the western portion of the study. I also have Ron Clark from Parsons, who assisted us on this file. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Nelson to undertake his presentation.
Thank you, Vivi, and thank you, Chair Egline. When the Confederation Line comes into service under the downtown, there will be a significant reduction in the number of buses. As a result, the dedicated bus rapid transit lanes on Albert Street, Slater Street, and the Mackenzie Bridge will no longer be needed. This study takes the opportunity to reimagine and repurpose this space on Albert and Slater Streets and the Mackenzie Bridge by using cost-effective road modifications and by creating new street layouts in coordination with major capital works projects. The recommended plan reallocates space on the street made available by the decommissioning of the reserved transit lanes and fulfills study objectives. It improves walking, cycling, and overall accessibility, accommodates buses on revised routes that connect directly to the Confederation Line stations, and generally maintains vehicle capacity with the existing number of lanes and related road functions. Some of the key metrics on the screen highlight improvements that we've made to sustainable transportation. 18 intersections improved for pedestrians and cyclists with a focus on safety, comfort, and accessibility. There's actually 1 less vehicle lane for pedestrians to cross at intersections. There's a significant reduction in the number of buses along the corridor. Over 2.7 kilometers of new dedicated cycling facilities. Vehicle capacity is maintained, as noted, with the 2 existing travel lanes and the majority of existing turn lanes. It fulfills a level of service policy objectives for all modes, and there's a reduction of over 580 tons of greenhouse gas emissions during the first year of operation. The recommended plan is based on a strong policy context set out in such council-approved documents as the official plan and the Transportation Master Plan. The improvements to Albert and Slater Streets and Mackenzie Bridge were identified as priority projects in the award-winning Downtown Moves document, which has been guiding projects since its approval in 2013. The design of the recommended plan is based on a solid precedence of projects. For the design of street treatments, we drew upon the best practices from previous complete street projects with our own community and best practices from other communities. We're all familiar with the existing conditions along the one-way pairs of Albert and Slater, from the open vacant land on LeBreton Flats with promise of redevelopment, to the central business district lined with high-density office development, to the grand views of the capital seen from the Mackenzie Bridge. This study area is over 4 kilometers long, and we've divided it into 3 sectors. The west sector is between Empress Avenue and Bay Street, and will soon undergo a full integrated road and infrastructure reconstruction. The core sector extends from Bay to Elgin and is where interim and targeted measures will be used within the existing curb line. The east sector includes the Mackenzie Bridge from Elgin to Waller Street. So now we'll highlight some of the recommendations for each of the sectors, starting in the west, the escarpment area. The work in this sector, between Empress and Bay, is being driven by the requirement to replace aging sewer and water mains, which will require a full road reconstruction and creates the opportunity to update the street design. This is where Albert and Slater separate into the 2 one-way streets that cross the downtown. Existing Slater Street is highlighted in the blue below, a little faded on your slides. And along here, existing Slater. The integrated road reconstruction project, along with extensive areas of vacant land, create the opportunity to look at ways to simplify and improve the road network in this area. The study team investigated a number of different options for road alignments. And presently, Slater Street intersects Albert Street at Empress Avenue. In this solution, Slater Street connects directly to Albert, but more in the east. A short segment of Commissioner Street is closed, and Bronson becomes a 2-way street. This eliminates a 5-point intersection on a steep grade. An environmental assessment is being undertaken to address these changes in the road pattern. The future home of the Ottawa Central Library can also be seen on the plan view. The following illustrations highlights the key elements in the west sector. This view is on LeBreton, looking east to the downtown, with the future Ottawa Central Library on the left. Key elements of a complete street are evident, including wide accessible sidewalks with street trees, providing access between communities and to major destinations. Raised cycle tracks separated from traffic serves a wide range of users and ties into a more extensive cycling network. Crosswalks, rides serve active transportation, and a simpler, more efficient road pattern addresses those who may be traveling by automobile. The plan creates opportunity for civic-defining open spaces and streetscapes. This view, looking west, the elements of a complete street are continued, and the future Ottawa Central Library would be on our right. It's important to note that the study team has been working closely with other city service areas, including the Ottawa Central Library team. Planning and design will continue on these 2 independent but related projects. Construction of the road will be coordinated with the Ottawa Central Library project. Now then, the next sector we'll highlight is in Centretown, the core sector between Bay and Elgin. In this sector, interim measures and targeted modifications, generally within the existing curb line, are recommended to expedite a flexible solution that will reallocate space among all the travel modes and street users, coordinate with other capital works projects, and lead to a longer-term ultimate street plan. This view of Slater between Bank and O'Connor illustrates separated bike lanes on the right side of the street, transit platforms that serve customers. 2 general purpose traffic lanes are maintained with buses operating in mixed traffic. Space for street side functions such as all-day parking, loading, and hotel zones are also available. As well, space for street enhancements such as landscape and planters. These measures will enable the tens of thousands of commuting workers who travel by LRT, bus, automobile, bike, and on foot to have better access to their in the highest density of office employment in the region. Here you can see, in this detailed view, a bus at a transit stop. This is where and this might be helpful for us to discuss the Transportation and Parking Bylaw amendment that's before you today. There's a platform area where people can get on and off the bus. The cyclist on the cycle track that passes behind the platform. The sidewalk is next to that. In this situation, when people are getting on and off the bus, the cyclist yields to pedestrians. But if there were no transit platform at the curb and only a bike lane or a bike track, then the cyclist must come to a full stop, allowing people to get on and off the bus. This is addressed in the bylaw amendment. I'd like to bring your attention to the possible changes in the supply of parking. Presently, the amount of parking on Albert and Slater changes throughout the day, increasing and decreasing as travel needs change. In this solution, special spaces related to business functions such as loading, lay-bys, taxi, and hotel zones are retained. All-day parking is actually increased by 65 spaces, but evening and weekend on-street parking, which occurs on the underused travel lanes at those times, is reduced. To put this last change into context, there's approximately 3,000 unreserved off-street parking spaces within one block of Albert and Slater that are only used about 20 to 45% of capacity on evenings and weekends. Many of these are free and low-cost alternatives, including those at City Hall, World Exchange Plaza, 240 Sparks, and on city lots between Kent and Bank and O'Connor. This sector is the Mackenzie Bridge between Elgin and Waller. Presently, there are 2 vehicle lanes on the bridge in each direction. One lane is the dedicated transit lane, and the other is a general-purpose traffic lane. The approximately 50 to 60% reduction of buses in bus volumes creates the opportunity to reallocate the dedicated bus lanes among the many users of the bridge. The proposed design works with the existing bridge deck and is flexible enough to guide future bridge renewal. The plan illustrates the recommended changes, including where it maintains general traffic lanes and turning lanes with buses traveling in mixed traffic over the Rideau Canal. It moves cycling lanes to the right side and improves pedestrian connections and experiences along the bridge to the major destinations and takes advantage of some of the best views of the capital. Now then, the recommendations for the west end of the bridge between the Rideau Centre and Elgin Street reallocates and rearranges the lanes over the historic Rideau Canal. For the east sector of the bridge, between the Rideau Centre and Waller, we work within the existing bridge deck, accommodating transit stops and transit priority measures, and this means that the existing median cycling lanes will remain along this section. But this does provide the opportunity for continuity through the Waller intersection to a future bikeway along the LRT at the University of Ottawa. Consultation on the recommended functional design and the Slater Street realignment environmental assessment used a range of measures to engage community, business, and advocacy groups, as well as technical and agency stakeholders. The environmental assessment for Slater Street realignment addresses the range of typical subject areas, including archaeology, cultural heritage, species at risk, and potential site contamination. But a subject that was of particular interest to the committee members was the impact on trees in the area. The environmental assessment has identified the trees affected by the plan and will recommend mitigation measures. During detailed design, the city will work with the National Capital Commission to develop a tree retention, protection, and replacement strategy for the reconstruction of Albert Street, the realignment of Slater Street, and for the decommissioning of the existing Slater Street. This strategy, of course, will be available to the public. The strategy will be guided by the city's urban forestry bylaws and such things as a 2-to-1 tree replacement for smaller trees but a more specific evaluation method for larger trees is outlined. The city successfully applied for provincial funding for the core and east sectors of Albert and Slater Streets and Mackenzie King Bridge. This is between Bay and Waller. Funding announcements from the province are expected shortly. This project was successful because it demonstrated a reduction in greenhouse gases by reallocating space on the street to zero-emission active transportation and through its support of investment in public transit. The additional funding would be used to build more permanent features, such as improved pedestrian facilities, new cycle tracks and lanes, improvements to intersections, and new streetscape elements. Some of the key steps for this study are to complete the environmental assessment process in the early summer, complete the update to the traffic and parking bylaw, start work on the detailed design for the various sectors of Albert and Slater Street in coordination with related other infrastructure projects, work with the National Capital Commission to complete federal approvals and land acquisition, and initiate construction in 2019 in association with various Albert and Slater Street Mackenzie King projects, or renewal projects along that corridor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a number of delegations, but before we do that, the Vice Chair has a direction for staff, so I figure we'll get that out there now and sort of set the table so all the issues are out there. So if I could ask you to provide your direction.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is in reference to the Good Companion Center, as many of you know, is located just down on off Empress and Slater, and we'll have this decommissioning rather of Slater will have some impact on their access and egress. So I just wanted to direct that city staff will work with the NCC to ensure a secondary access for the Good Companion Center will be considered as part of any future development opportunities associated with the decommissioned Slater Street lands. So we've had that discussion. I think that's...
We will take that as direction.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks very much. So the first speaker is Yasna Jennings from the Wyward Market BIA. No need to run. It's okay.
Sorry, that was quicker than I thought it was going to be.
It's okay.
Hi, I'm Yasna Jennings, Executive Director for the Byward Market BIA, and I'm here today to express concern about one portion of the report, and that's to do with the reduction of lanes on the Mackenzie King Bridge. We have concerns because we did market research, thanks in part to a grant through economic development of the city, of our customers. And for the first time in, I would say, close to 100 years, the number one concern and the number one deterrent for people coming to the market was, in fact, the construction and impacts of all the lane closures, street closures that's happened downtown, I would say mostly due to light rail construction. But that was a real shocker that the first time parking has come second as a deterrent. The concerns are, one, we actually weren't involved in this process or consultation, so we're not sure if the appropriate counts have been done to ensure appropriate access to the market. We also have concerns that it's fairly short-sighted. There's only 2 crossings over the canal, and with a city that's growing, especially a city growing in the urban core, an awful lot of people are going to be down here moving around. And we would also like to, we think that this might be a little premature, given we don't really know what the movements are of people with LRT coming. That basically sums up. I mean, Laurier is regularly closed for events, for runs, for walks, for Winterlude, all of that. So that only leaves Mackenzie King as the other option to put buses in with traffic. is concerning, but again, I'm not exactly sure where all the bus stops are, but we really haven't been part of this process, and we were a little bit concerned when we saw that recommendation. From what I quickly read in the report, I think some of this is, we're still quite a ways away, so perhaps the outcome of this can be that appropriate, work and counts will be done after LRT is in place, so we can really see what the impacts of traffic and how people are moving in the downtown core. I think that probably sums up my comments pretty quick.
Okay, thank you. The couple of questions for you. First, Vice Chair's question for you.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for coming out. I wonder if I have a question of staff, which I'll ask later about the buses and the vast reduction of buses that will be using Mackenzie King as a result of them on Albert and Slater. And I wondered if you were aware of that many of the buses that now...
Yes, but then our understanding was also should impacts happen elsewhere that buses would be transferred. So if we should be in a situation where we've got, some major scenario, whatever, downtown, everything's all of a sudden jammed onto this bridge. We've now only got one lane to move people in either direction. I think because it was the Albert-Slater corridor, we may not have been involved in it, and it may not have even been flagged for us, to be totally honest, thinking that the impacts were going to be on the bridge. We really were not involved in any of the process. So I'd say we probably have a lot of learning to go along the way, but from the onset, the reduction of the lane is certainly concerning for us and for access and basic movements in the downtown, and making sure that the downtown is still accessible and attractive to people to come downtown.
Do you mentioned that you did a survey with folks that were coming down into the market. Do you know how many people will want to travel by bike now that there will be a very safe route, and how many people will also want to travel by LRT, which is one of the largest investments that we've made in this city in recent history?
The questions were not about what people were planning to do in the future. It was really to judge pedestrian and traffic flow in the market prior to LRT, so that we had some kind of starting point, so that when LRT comes online, we plan to do exactly that same survey to see how things have changed. And that's why I said from the get-go, it raised red flags for us, because we weren't involved in those discussions, and we don't really know how LRT is going to impact everybody's movement. So, like I said, maybe a takeaway is that we kind of re-examine those movements and see if this is still a viable option moving forward after LRT is online.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fleury.
Thank you, Yasna, for coming this morning. I certainly know of the concern of the public perception or reality of the access to the market in general. I know, and we've heard from our members collectively of the challenges around the Nicholas on and off ramp of the 417 and some of the challenge there. I think a lot of it has to do as to how we communicate the access into the market, and that will continue to evolve as the LRT opens. I'm confident, I know that you're confident of that as well. And as you know, there's lots going on, right? With the LRT opening, there's the street resurfacing of streetscaping of Rideau Street, the portion between Sussex and Dalhousie, which will, for the construction period, have an impact into the area. There's also the public realm plan that Steve Willis and his group are undertaking for this year. So that will also take a look at holistically at the access and the future of the public realm and the Byward Market. So I kind of see this project a bit as a tie into that, and certainly a lot of the assumptions that are put in place reflect today's volumes without the LRT, but there's obviously some consideration as to the impacts of the LRT. And I think these are goals. My understanding is it's not totally funded, especially the portion when we get out of the Albert and Slater corridors. So I'm confident that there's opportunities to work through it. I hear your concerns, but we don't necessarily know collectively, the city or the business community, what the future after the LRT will be, because we haven't lived it yet. So I think it's more of a work in progress in that regards, and certainly I think it's good to have a vision as to what we want the corridor to be. I personally want more of Mackenzie, as we know the current base of the bridge has some limitations, and there's opportunities to reconfigure what that will be when the deck of the bridge is being redone, and there's at least some portions that are going to be redone. I think the report it says 2020, and that's near the NAC. The underground parking lot of the NAC needs to be redone, so there's a big portion there that will completely be reconstructed. So there's opportunities to see the build form of the bridge completely changed, and that's certainly, we want the engagement from the Rideau Centre, from the NAC, from the D&D, from both BIAs, and from the community in Centretown as to what the layout of. So I'm happy. What I'm hearing from you is, we don't know what will be after the LRT. Let's ensure that holistically we take a big look at how the accessibility overall in the zone is looked at, and it's hard for staff today as a standalone project to show that, but I know that VV's group is looking at it from a wider perspective in terms of traffic volume, bus service, accessibility, and the use of the LRT. So great feedback, and I know that they'll continue to pursue those considerations going forward, and obviously engage you as part of that.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, thank you very much. Seeing no more questions, I'll call the next delegation, which is Mr. Chris Bradshaw on behalf of Walk Ottawa. Morning, Chris.
Good morning, Chairman Egley and Vice Chairman McKenna. I just wanted to be here because our group doesn't have any record of having received an invite to be part of your community consultation exercise throughout. It does purport to make a great improvement to the pedestrian environment, and I believe it does. The drawings that we got, computerized drawing, could only be blown up very little, and it doesn't really provide detail. One of the areas of concern is that there doesn't appear to be a sidewalk opposite the new library site. There's a triangle of land bringing the two streets together, and there's no sign of a sidewalk on the Albert half of that, or part of that triangle. So I'd love assurance that there will be one there, and that is part of an intersection to allow people to cross and to therefore get on and off of that island. Just going to get my visual aid here. That seems to be the only missing link. Another link in terms of crossings of the street is that in the area between between O'Connor and Metcalfe, there is both between Albert and Slater and between Albert and Queen, there is a pedestrian connection, mid-block connection there. And there's been no recognition given to that in terms of people emerging on the street on one side, wanting to cross and continue with the mall on the other side. I'm referring to the Canlands building, which is the TD facility, and then across from it is an older mall. And whether there would be a crossing there, and perhaps a little less easy to justify, considering there's no continuation of it south of Slater, that there be one there as well. Third, the current design of the bike lane on Laurier has a serious flaw, to my estimation, is that they do a break in this curbing that defines or supposedly protects the cyclists. They do a break at parking lot entrances, but they don't do so at building entrances. Building entrances is where people enter and leave, people with strollers, people with wheelchairs, and seniors who have difficulty in one movement stepping up and over a curb that is 6 inches wide and 7 inches high. There needs to be a formal break, or the curb needs to be wider and ramped up and over in front of building entrances. That is a feature which I'm sure is far beyond what you may perhaps consider, but it sounds like, Nelson, you're taking into account my concern there. Speed limits on the street don't seem to be mentioned. I think there's an opportunity as you reduce the amount of traffic, is that you could, in fact, may need to curb traffic that in the past has been curbed by congestion. There will not be as much congestion to curb it, so it may need to be, this is a chance to make a statement in terms of this is not a part of the street that we expect you to travel at a speed that could cause injury to a pedestrian serious enough to permanently maim them or kill them. I think this is important state to make. Another thing, just stepping back for a little bit, is that there seems to be only talk of the change in the character of traffic in the street. I don't think that there's appreciation enough that there has been an adjustment on the street for 30-some years in terms of the retail makeup, in terms of the kind of street sidewalk activities that would have occurred had there been less of this noise, vibration, fumes, and so forth. And I think there's going to be quite a renaissance. And I didn't see any projection as to possible sites for redevelopment, corner sites especially, where this might well happen, and that you want, in fact, encourage it to happen. So I didn't see any of that in the report. In terms of parking, there seems to be a great deal about how much car parking you're going to add, but I didn't see anything in terms of bike parking. And I intended to bring along, but I don't know how to put these things into slides, a picture of a bike lane. This is from Vancouver, by the way, from the price tags site of about a week and a half ago, showing that the parking that's adjacent to the bike lane in the street, in other words, protecting the bike lane from the through traffic, was bike parking, not car parking. I'm not suggesting this in every case, but I'm saying that I think there may be certain amounts of it that will occur. People may well be bringing their bikes down on rapid transit, and we'll be looking for places to park it. Hopefully not all day long. Those should be provided, parking spaces should be provided inside the building by the employer. It's the on-street people, and I think people will come downtown for shopping and other things and look for a place to park their bikes fairly close. And this is, of course, now 2 and 3 blocks, or 1 and 2 blocks away from where they'll come out of the light rail line. In terms of the Mackenzie Bridge, this is something that in my capacity as Vice Chair of the Seniors Transportation Committee at Council on Aging, we wrote to the city, the mayor's office, and asked, were we not going to have a new renaissance, I will say, of having the transfer point between local bus routes to rapid transit and vice versa occur all within Rideau Street? Because there was a rumor at that time, and David Reevely called them, that they were going to move all the local bus routes from Rideau over onto the bridge in order to make use of a lot of infrastructure that had been invested there in the recent decade. So I would like to see, on behalf of those people who walk 3.5 blocks each way through Rideau Centre, which apparently the mayor's office reminded us that this was part of an original deal in 1980 to help get Rideau Centre on its feet. I think Rideau Centre is on its feet now. I think their recent expansion shows that they are making a very private and significant investment in what is a reality now, and don't need the assistance of having a forced march through the center, many of which, by the way, are only looking at windows of closed stores.
Chris, I'm going to ask you to wrap up.
I love to entertain, and I'm glad for your patience. Anyway, I think the final thing is, again, down in the west sector, the route that you now take when you are cycling there with a temporary arrangement is a fairly steep grade. There's 2 sections up Albert, and then you have to cut across that little extension of Commissioner Street. It looks like...
Chris, you're almost 2 minutes over at this point.
Harder grade. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I don't know if there are any questions for you. I did see a lot of head nodding among staff and a lot of note-taking. So I think what I was going to ask or direct staff, if it's possible, it sounds like Walk Ottawa has a number of ideas. Is it possible to do a follow-up meeting with Chris or someone else from the board to have a bit more than the 5 minutes that we allow here, to have a bit more of an in-depth conversation?
Yes,
okay?
Of course, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. We have one more delegation on this particular matter, and that's Peggy Ducharme from the Downtown Rideau BIA.
Good morning. I'm here to represent the Downtown Rideau BIA, as noted, and we, at this point, are, in theory, supporting what is being proposed. We have not had a conversation at our board level on this particular project in a couple of years since the Rideau renewal study had been brought forward to us, which this project had been identified. So we look forward to that coming back for discussion at our board. We have not been consulted as of yet, so I would think that this is now our opportunity to get more involved in that regard. I just wanted the opportunity today to flag what we have been considering for a while in committee level at our organization that might be a possibility and potential for this public space going forward. In the context of, to keep in mind, obviously, I believe, which has been stated by Byward Market BIA as I was arriving, so I missed the front end of their presentation, but the concerns about how do we address rerouting traffic, transit, obviously, that will remain on the bridge and other after LRT opens in the event of emergency, accident or otherwise. But in the same context, from an economic development standpoint, that this is a large parcel of public space that will be renewed and quite attractive, and most importantly is a major connecting point to significant landmarks around it that are tourism based. So it connects the new Ottawa Art Gallery and the revised, redeveloped Ottawa Arts Court, as well as Shaw Centre. The hotels, the new Le Germain, the Novotel, the Les Suites, the Westin are all on that side of the canal. Then across the canal, we have the newly redeveloped National Arts Centre. Think of that in the context of venues that can be pulled from outdoor festival space with inclement weather indoor to some of these adjacent, very convenient facilities. And the parklands along the canal and the boating tourism community that could come up to these levels to enjoy festival space, major event space. La Machine highly used the bridge last year. And then it also connects with the Confederation Square Park and Festival Plaza grounds of the City Hall facility here too. So as you're evolving and you're thinking about Le Breton Flats and the future potentials there, this side of the canal equally has different opportunities to, with hotel accommodation and convention accommodation and a different offering to facilitate larger gatherings that I think this particular asset of public space could really be a jewel in the crown of setting the nation's capital as a preferred location for some of these. Think of Jazz Fest expanding, the views that you could have from the bridge, looking at Parliament, and so on and so forth. So I would just ask that through this process we don't lose sight of that economic development opportunity and keep that in mind. Thank you.
Very much. Any questions for the delegation? Okay, seeing none. That's our final delegation on this matter. We can now move to questions to staff, and I'm going to kick that off. We've heard a concern expressed by one of the BIAs around whether you've done appropriate traffic counts, whether you've taken into account what traffic patterns and numbers might be after LRT's in place. I'm wondering if you could talk to that issue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we'd be pleased to. So the general question of traffic capability along the corridor. So there's 4 points. I guess firstly, just reminding ourselves this project is seizing on the opportunity presented by decommissioning of the transitway and the bus-only lanes along Albert and Slater Street. So that presents a wonderful opportunity for the city to accommodate more completeness on this particular street. And with the reduction or the elimination of the transitway, what comes off the street is the complexity that we find today on Albert and Slater with the bus-only lanes and the signage and so forth. So it makes a much more efficient corridor for all modes to move through. I guess the second point is we are very mindful in preparing this plan of the planned function of Albert and Slater Street as an arterial road. So as an arterial road, the mandate is to continue to provide for the highest volumes of traffic traveling over the longer distances. So that has been accommodated. However, we know that Albert and Slater are unique arterial roads in that the function they play through the downtown is primarily distributing traffic to the north-south streets, whether that be Elgin, Metcalfe, O'Connor Bank, Kent, Lyon, and Bay, and Bronson. So in carrying out this study, we performed the technical analyses you would expect, the multimodal level of service analyses for all modes, including vehicles, and turned our mind to the turning movements in particular. So certainly the two general purpose travel lanes, the studies indicate are satisfactory, they're appropriate, they're adequate for the volumes of all vehicles, including buses, that you will find on these corridors. In terms of turning permissions, which is really important for these, especially in the central business district area, the plan has been set up that turns can be provided at all intersections. Now, the detailed regulations and restrictions will be confirmed during the detailed design, but certainly the plan can accommodate that. And not only that, at the higher movement vehicle locations, there's 5 locations where right turn lanes, protected, dedicated right turn lanes have been provided so that those turning vehicles can be out of the general traffic flow. So on balance, we think this recommended plan does find a balance between adding that completeness that's lacking from the streets today while still providing for that arterial road function and the bus, connecting bus routes through the downtown.
Vivi, I saw you interested in chiming in on this as well.
Yes,
So.
Because the issue came up with through Ms. Jennings and Ms. Ducharme's presentations. We would be happy to meet with both of them to talk about the operational traffic issues in more detail with them.
Okay, I was going to give you direction, but you've already offered, so I don't think that's necessary. So I appreciate that, and I think they're both still in the room. Maybe not. Yes, they are. So. They'll be in touch. Okay. We'll move to questions from committee members. So first on my list, well, he's actually not a committee member, he's just visiting, but is Councillor Cloutier.
Thank you, Chair. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you for the presentation, and I think we all acknowledge the importance of the Albert Slater corridor and the Mackenzie King. Just have a few questions. In the West End, there's been some concern with the new library and the escarpment. And I understand that it's a full reconstruction, water main. Is there an opportunity to reduce or to improve that for people who will be walking to the new library, to reduce the grade or to make any other adjustments that would be beneficial for those pedestrians?
Thank you, Chair. That was a fundamental point raised early in the project. It was raised by our working group. It was a primary concern. And through the reconstruction and the reconfiguring of Slater Street, we've been able to moderate the grades to hit those accessibility targets. That was fundamental to get people across, was really an escarpment from Upper Town, if you will, down into LeBreton Flats. So the project has been designed to moderate the grades along the sidewalks and cycle tracks in the corridor, and with a special focus on accessibility.
Okay, thank you. Following up on Chair Eglei's question regarding modal splits, the modal splits are different certainly they'll be different after the LRT comes online. They'll be improved for more sustainability. But those modal splits change in the seasons, in the summer and in the winter. Have you considered that as part of your planning for Mackenzie King, that there will be more cars in the winter?
Yes, we have. We've taken a look at all travel volumes that would apply throughout the year in each of the modes, so that we could plan the space to be sufficient to fulfill that capacity in a year-round situation on Mackenzie King Bridge and on the roads on Albert and Slater through the downtown.
Okay. You said in your comment or maybe it's OC, that there'll be a 50 or 60% reduction in buses, and I guess my reaction is that all? Yeah, are most of those buses STO buses, or?
Thank you for the opportunity to explain a little bit further, is that in general, there is a 50 to 60% reduction, and in some areas along the corridor, there is even a greater level of reduction. It's really based on the fact that buses are now moving in different ways through the downtown core to bring them closer so that patrons can access from bus directly to the LRT stations, so that they choose different routes. Some segments of Albert and Slater have a very low number of buses. Some segments have a reduction of about 50 and 60%, and some slightly greater than that. So it's variable throughout the corridor, unlike today, where we have pretty much a constant flow of buses along the entire corridor. We have new routings that change that. So in some situations, yes, there will be greater.
As we develop our relationship with STO and maybe in the future the Prince of Wales Bridge, those STO buses would be taken off the Mackenzie King Bridge and off Rideau Street and off Slater and Albert?
This plan addresses the immediate needs for operations in 2018, but does set the framework to be a durable plan into the future as traffic patterns change, yes.
So,
Councillor, yes, if there's a new facility as a new light rail connection across the Prince of Wales Bridge, that will affect the operational situation, and we will develop that at that time as well, because that would be another connection for STO, an interprovincial connection for users both from Gatineau and Ottawa.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I could, I just want to jump in on this one because it's a critical question. You may recall that the two mayors did a joint announcement on a historic deal with our good partners over at STO. There is a significant reduction of STO buses. Mr. Scrimger and his team in Vivi have been working on that for literally years. So you will see a major transfer point of STO buses going over to Lyon Street, and then there are still some that will continue on. That took a few years to work out with our STO partners. So the point that staff make about 50 to 60 seems low, but that's just an overall average. There are some spots here over the 80% mark, but you will see a significant reduction of STO buses ending at Lyon Street. There's works going on there right now. We've sized that station and the fare gates and everything, all the infrastructure to accommodate those transfer points. And STO customers will either choose to walk a block or so, or they'll transfer onto the LRT at that point. So I just wanted to remind members of the committee that there is a deal that literally a legal agreement has been struck with STO that has been done voluntarily. And it fits in exactly with where staff have taken this project of the goal is to reduce the amount of traffic through the core, so it's substantial in nature.
Just a couple more questions. So in the future, I think Madame Ducharme talked about emergency situations. The bridge, and it's a major route to get out of downtown. In certain situations, it can be reconfigured relatively quickly to accommodate more lanes of traffic, or in the short term.
Yes. So the question is capacity on Mackenzie Bridge for emergency or a unique event. So the lane arrangement that's recommended with this plan provides for a 6-meter asphalt surface on each side of the existing medium. So what essentially that provides is a fire route across the bridge in each direction. And you would note on some of the drawings the use of flexible bollards. In an emergency situation, a vehicle could pass through and wind through those areas around those flexible bollards. So that's an integral part of the plan.
Okay. I think that is all my questions for now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Couchet. Next on the list is Councillor Fleury.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll begin by thanking staff. We have met many times on this matter, and I just wanted to highlight a few of my interests. Certainly overall, I think the plan's heading in the right direction. We're achieving the goals of what do we do with these corridors once they're not bus rapid transit. I think that's the fundamental of what these are, and basically there's public spaces that now become available. And how do we define those spaces? You're presenting, after countless hours of work, some of those objectives. So overall, I want to ensure that those goals are met. My interest obviously rests east of Elgin, although I am interested as to how the connection with Centretown and even west of that coordinates. My first question would be actually to Mr. Manconi, specific for, you talked about the achievement of the discussions and relationship with STO, what that means. Maybe more fundamentally, could you speak to some of the local feeders, their impact on Rideau Street versus what will be beginning or end of route on Mackenzie Bridge, and what the relationship between both of those corridors? Because you spoke very specifically as to STO, which I'm very proud of those achievements. I think, overall, the longer-term game is that full integration of our LRT in and around Bayview, Mocam Station, and we know that, but there's a nice interim step there that was negotiated and allows us to do what we want here. But I'd love to hear maybe more specific as to OC's operations and this dilemma of, are we servicing transit users? How are we allowing for proper flow and integration into the LRT? And what does that mean for Rideau Street or versus Mackenzie?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I think it's an important question in that it touches on both the micro and the macro view of the whole file. And when you overlay the transformation of the LRT, which we've heard over and over again, the interesting part of this file is it's your first tipping point of what LRT gives you in terms of a bunch of other council objectives, sustainable streets, mobility, and all those things. And the plan at the micro level gives you all that. But all of the speakers have touched on what I think are very, very important points about how do all the sum of the parts come together to get what we all want, which is sustainability, mobility, economic development, pedestrian movement, cyclists, multimodal, modal shares, all that stuff. So I could be here all day talking about it, but just to suffice to say is the following, that we have taken all of those elements and put them together. There have been numerous discussions and meetings about, for example, what the split of OC Transfo and STO buses on Rideau Street vis-a-vis Mac Bridge should be. Before the sinkhole, it was get all the buses off of Rideau Street. Post the sinkhole, could you please bring the buses back because we need our customers to get there, which one of the speakers spoke about today. And she's absolutely correct. It is a balancing act. The good news is we've done all that balancing act. We can tell you exactly what that split will look like in finite detail about how many buses per hour, per day, and what those volumes will generate. We can tell you where the bus stops are. We can tell you that Phil Landry and his technical team have done a overarching emergency detour route on should the system go down, both from the LRT perspective or the bus system. And we've had lots of practice with rerouting buses in the core. With the sinkhole, both we had the initial shutdown, and then there was the extended shutdown. So we have all that expertise, and I just want to assure you that we will meet individually with those speakers that have spoken today, because their questions were very important both at the micro and the macro level. And I can tell you that we have all those bases covered, and we'd be happy to share that both for the short-term and the long-term view in terms of what the plan that has been generated because of your investment in LRT and what it does on all those lenses, whether it's economical, environmental, or mobility, and so forth. And we do have all those interests at heart. We're not doing trade-offs as, for example, we're not going to lose customers to the market for the expense of ridership. We want everybody to be mobile in the city on all modes, and we want everybody to be economically successful, environmentally successful, and so forth. And I'll also close off with all those, one of the speakers spoke about the art gallery, the NAC. I can tell you we've had meetings with them about how we drive customers to them from the LRT. whether it's through advertising, whether it's through online ticketing, and so forth. So I'm in agreement with all the questions that have been raised, and I can assure you we've tracked all the speakers, and we'll be happy to meet with them, Mr. Chair, to follow up.
Thank you. Now, more questions specifically for the project. So the elements that I remain confused in the project is not the goals, but how do we get there? Because there's some portions that are funded and will achieve the end outcome that we want. There's some that are going to achieve kind of a stop, like the buses aren't running, so there's space on the road. What are we doing with that space? And then there's maybe the longer term, which is for my end, which is the Mackenzie Bridge deck redone. So can you just briefly walk through from the west to the east, what's funded and which portions are the outcome? Because I'm to this day just still confused as to what components of the budget are covering the endpoint and what are still elements that we'd have to come back for infrastructure dollars.
Chair Eglai. So, when looking at Mackenzie King Bridge at Elgin in the east, Waller to the west, there is an opportunity, as we pointed out, to reallocate the work within the space, working within generally the existing curb line, existing central median, and the curb line on the north side. We have maintained, to the greatest extent possible, the existing turn lanes at the intersections of both Albert and Slater at Elgin. We've been informed by our colleagues that there will be a renewal to the bridge deck over the National Arts Centre that will require a relaying of that deck. So we have prepared our plans such that it will guide reconstruction from Elgin of the bridge deck all the way over to just where it passes over the Rideau Canal. So they can, when they set the deck back in place, they can set it back following our plan and actually create cycle tracks. The segment over the historic
so maybe
Rideau,
just so that I can understand. So the portion that you're talking about east of Elgin, fundamentally, that's planned but unfunded. Would that be fair to say? I guess that's where I get confused on the plan. Like, correct. We have the goal that we know the deck has to be redone. We set in the report it says 2020, but it's an unfunded program, right? Like, okay, so that portion's unfunded. Then, if you could continue just to clarify what's funded.
That's correct. So that would be for the full bridge reconstruction. What is funded is our interim measure, as we've, or at least is outlined in the budget scenarios. So we have interim measures that can be applied. Now, those would apply from over the historic Rideau Canal all the way to the Rideau Centre, which really is what you've seen with the reallocation of lanes, installation of streetscape elements, and creation of the bike lane. That is within the funding request of this project that's been outlined in the report. That requires, at this time, no major modification to the bridge deck. From Rideau Centre, the last third, if you will, or the most eastern third of the bridge, to Waller Street, there is no recommendation this time in the horizon that we're seeing for a reconstruction of the bridge deck. So we had to continue to work within the existing features of the bridge, sidewalks, locations, and median. So as part of this project, our recommendation is not to wait for reconstruction, but rather return cyclists to the median. And there we will make enhancements to the quality of that riding in that corridor with enhanced safety features, including the green paint for awareness, flexi stakes, and better offsets and buffers. So that is part of the budget ask that has been laid out for this project.
And just to clarify, west of Elgin, what is funded to its final state? Because again, that's confusing.
Between Elgin and Bay would be the application of interim and strategic measures.
Okay. And then west of Bay?
West of Bay would be the full reconstruction from Bay to Empress.
Thank you.
With sewer, water, full road reconstruction.
Okay, thank you. Now to my specific questions, and thank you for that, because I think it's important. There are different treatments in different segments, and I think that in the report it's articulated, just not clearly articulated as to which section in my mind, and I know a bit of the file. I want to speak specifically for Mackenzie Bridge, and you spoke on the report about the intentions of having a pedestrian crosswalk, and many of us use it regularly, which is the Confed Park stairs that go, and a lot of people have the intention of crossing there rather than going what I'll call the D&D Rideau Center crosswalk. So you speak to it in your report. There's a portion of the deck that's being redone. How do we ensure that it carries through in that review? That's what I'm concerned about. So, you've highlighted, you've heard about it in the consultation. How do we ensure that it's funded and implemented as part of the deck review?
Councillor, the elements that we heard through consultation and the desire lines that people where they want to walk and cross, we have taken that into account, and we will roll that through into the detailed design. Now, so to implement some of these changes would require funding. So there is funding associated with the bridge deck renewal, so that'll come in 2020. And we have some dollars here, and when we have the greenhouse gas challenge fund confirmed, there would be more funding to put in. So our project is about, this is what we could do in the interim and also the future, and taking opportunities to coordinate with other works in the area to get the best value, the efficiency of the budgets. So I hope I've answered your question there. All the comments that we've received are going to be carried through to detailed design, and we will look for opportunities, the best opportunities, to roll them in so that we get to the end state as efficiently as possible.
Okay. And the interim measures that are presented, there's some visuals. And I remember a colleague of ours, Peter Hume, a few years ago, who, when we approved Arts Court, said, let's make sure that the amount of trees and plan that's presented is actually the outcome. I'm interested in the interim measures, and I know that sometimes from one group to the other, when it shifts to the operational side, things get taken off the map. So how do we ensure that the interim measures that are presented are actually funded and done to what's presented here in the drawings? I'm concerned about that because we often see either budget restrictions or operational challenges. Have those been discussed and resolved with the plan that's presented today?
Yes, Chair. And we have presented a plan that is within the affordable envelope that we have put into our capital budget forecast. So that's there. The bonus is this greenhouse gas challenge fund. When that comes through, then we can do more. So as a minimum, we will implement what you see in this plan.
Okay. And my final question, or my final comment question, is around the struggles that we've had as part of the engagement with the community for the connection to what's going to be known as the multi-use pathway along the LRT line, which I'm super supportive of, but ends at Waller, right at the base of the bridge, if you will, at the University of Ottawa. And the connection across that intersection in and around the bridge, I know that there's a good fix past the Rideau Center, if you will, past the bus stops, where there's seamless integration. But from the Rideau Center D&D crosswalk right through to that multi-use pathway, there remains a challenge of design, of physical nature. So at which point do we cross that conversation beyond being when we redo the bridge? Like, is there an interim measure for that section at some point in time? And if so, when is it?
So yes, as part of the design and recommended plan before you today, we do maintain the median cycling between the Rideau Center, a pedestrian crossing, to Waller. Interestingly enough, that median cycling is bidirectional and lines up across the Waller intersection with the future LRT pathway, so it will tie right directly into that. That was an important feature. But you were pointing out areas of where we want to improve a sense of safety, a sense of comfort for the rider over and above what's there today. And in doing that, we're able to provide further buffer areas. We're able to provide those temporary or pin curbs that you're familiar with along other street improvements that we've done. And we'll install such things as the flexi posts, so there'll be a greater sense of comfort for the rider. But as we arrive to that intersection, we will clearly demarc the crossing of that cycling facility across the intersection, which is an important improvement over today. So we believe we have taken measures that can be immediately implemented within the existing conditions to improve the quality and the sense of safety and comfort for the cyclist, and to tying into that facility to the east across the Wall intersection.
Okay, that's fair, and I'm done, Mr. Chair, but just the one point that we will continue to see a challenge having cyclists curb edge on Mackenzie Bridge and at some point needing to go to the median. So until it's fully redesigned and that's corrected, we will continue to get, that is a pressure point of major concern to us.
Thank you, Councillor Chernyshenko.
Thank you very much. Not so much questions as really just to support what I see in front of me. Of course, as we've heard from some of the delegations, there's still some detail to be worked out, and any particular group or interest that hasn't been consulted to date and has a concern, I hope you'll still. I hear that you're still prepared to do that, which I'm grateful for. There's no question to me this is of course a huge change over the canyon that we know now. And I don't think any of us are debating it or are arguing to keep it as it is. It's really about the fine details now at this point. I'm very excited by what I see. I want it all and I want it now. But I know I'm not going to get perhaps either of those. Maybe someday all of it. I just want to speak somewhat in reassurance to a couple of the delegations about some of the aspects raised. We quite regularly hear the emergency services element raised, but I find that it's assuming the worst in human behavior, which I've never actually observed, and that is that an emergency vehicle comes and nobody moves over and they all just sit the way they are and we don't change anything. Whereas, in fact, we do have emergency protocols, whether it's that even LRT, rail systems go down all over the world. They do, hopefully for a very short period of time. And so, shifting, reallocating use of lanes temporarily is something that's done in other cities. It's something that's quite possible to do. In an emergency situation, I don't know a cyclist that wouldn't begrudge a fire truck driving right over those flexi posts and using the cycle lane. So that's something that I often say to people who fear the worst. It'll be impossible. Emergency vehicles won't get through. Well, they do. They get through crowded New York streets and many others in Tokyo. And so that's possible. And certainly in terms of the attractiveness to existing customers, it's still early days on Main Street right now. There's a lot of opportunity to redevelop and for businesses to move in, and already we are hearing very positive feedback from people who live there, from businesses that would like to move there, from people who are outside of the neighborhood who are enjoying the experience of being there now, and I can see that being an outcome of what's in front of us now. So as you can tell, I'm very supportive. There's still details that we're not signing off on yet, still some funding to be confirmed, but thank you for bringing it to where it is now, and I'm very pleased to support it.
Thank you, Councillor, and Councillor Moffat.
Thank you very much. Just a quick point just on something. February 2nd, 2011, a bunch of us sat in this room for about 12 hours approving the Laurier Avenue bike lane. And I think at that time, I had been here for 2 months. I think in hindsight, looking back, I don't believe that we made the best decision that day. I think there were other options that we had that could have been better. I think Somerset maybe should have been looked at a bit closer. Always tough when you're coming in. I mean, any councillor who comes in knows that some of the decisions you make in the first few months, later on you might look back and see a bit differently. I've always felt that the Albert Slater opportunity created a chance to maybe address some of those concerns that we had with Laurier Avenue. We've seen in the last few years some distinct challenges that have been created because of the commingling of the different transportation methods on Laurier Avenue. Do you see this, Albert and Slater, the fact that we can cross, that we actually have a plan to get across the river, where that wasn't a part of the plan when we created the Laurier Avenue bike lane along the over the bridge? Do you see an opportunity where we could be subbing out one for the other, not to have the Laurier Avenue bike lane anymore, but just to have solely concentrated on Albert and Slater as your east-west corridor, and then possibly, get bikes off of Laurier because of the issues that we're seeing with the, right turns and all this stuff?
Chair, we do not have plans to discontinue Laurier bike lanes. In the cycling plan, which is a network, just like all the other modes. It's not just one corridor for roads, but there are many corridors for car traffic, and we need to provide similar opportunities in a network for cyclists as well. Because one of Council's decisions was to increase the modal share for active transportation. And to do so, we would have to make the facility safe, convenient, and convenience is the most important thing when it comes to someone making a decision on whether or not they take a bike or their car. So if it's convenient to access corridors for cycling, then they will do so. And therefore, we see this as augmenting the east-west movement for cyclists, not just on Laurier, but also on Albert and Slater.
Thanks. I just want to be clear. I'm not trying to take an anti-cycling approach here. I'm trying to take an anti-killing cycling approach, like killing cyclists approach here. Is Laurier the safest space for cyclists? Would Albert and Slater be safer for cyclists in the future? I think that when this is done, when we create this corridor, I think it would be wrong of us not to consider the two side by side and which one creates the safest opportunity for cyclists, as opposed to operating one parallel to the other that maybe is less safe than. I get the point. I get that you want to have as much opportunity for cyclists as possible getting across the city, but we also have to make sure that we're creating the safest space possible. And to date, Laurier hasn't exactly done that. That's all.
Shall I answer? We have completed the safety audit on Laurier as well as O'Connor, and that has been presented. So we feel that the improvements that have been made since that tragic accident has created a much safer corridor. There's more awareness. The signage, the shifting of the pavement markings have gone to improve that. And it's a very, very well-used corridor. We hit 2 million users, I think it was last year. So it's successful. And we look to improve our designs wherever we can, and we took that step with the safety audit.
Thanks. And just again, I'm not arguing the success of Laurier Avenue bike lane. I supported it at that time. I understand the rationale behind it. My only point is that I think if presented the opportunity today to do Albert and Slater instead, I think we would have taken that first.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Boyd.
Thanks very much for the presentation. I'm not sure if you have the key plan that was part of what was circulated with the documentation of councillors, the kind of the high-level overhead plan of the entire corridor, I guess. Or I guess, how are you making the transition on the cycling from the inside middle to the outer edges as you go from Waller onto the bridge across the canal?
The change occurs in coordination with the pedestrian crossing between the Rideau Centre and the National Defence Headquarters. In that location, we create cross-ride situations to address the cyclist moving from, if you will, curbside on the west end of the bridge to the median segment, the existing median segment. So it is there where we take that interchange along with the pedestrian crossings, and it'll be timed with the pedestrian movement.
So will that cycling movement only be permitted on the, I presume there's a red light to traffic at that point, or they can be crisscrossing in front of traffic that's moving across the bridge at whatever speed that traffic's moving?
We have designed it to address cyclists of varying ability and confidence. So those who wish to have a red light for their crossing and feel the most comfortable, we have created the situation, the opportunity for them to cross with the pedestrians as traffic is held. Those who may be a little more confident and to travel amongst vehicle lanes could cross, and that might be available in particular at midday when traffic volumes are low, to travel and signal their crossing of that lane. And
do we not think that that creates even greater potential for conflict? You know, part of driving a car, and I presume a bicycle in traffic as well, is being able to see the behaviors of the other motorists or cyclists and anticipate the move that they may or may not choose to make. If you're a motorist in that situation and you don't know that Mr. Manette is a confident or non-confident cyclist, how are you going to know what movement they may plan to do, and therefore being able to adjust your own driving behavior to accommodate for what that cyclist may or may not do?
So I'll try to answer in this way. There's three choices that a cyclist can make when, let's imagine we're traveling westbound on across the bridge and we're encountering the crossing facility. And Mr. Edwards certainly hit on two of them. If it's on a red light, if as a cyclist you're approaching a red light, in front of you there's a green bike box. Everyone's stopped. You have then the privilege to advance to the front of the queue and weave over on that red light. So that one is fairly clear. Mr. Edwards mentioned a second choice. If you're a more confident cyclist, you can weave over through traffic at higher speeds, and certain times of day there may be lower volumes of traffic, and many people may be comfortable doing that. But there's a third choice. On the green phase, when traffic is free-flowing, and so are you, on your bike, you can proceed across the cross ride, and you have a safe haven in that location where you on the far side. So this gives you a third choice for safe crossing.
I understand the choices for cyclists, and I think providing choice is probably not a bad thing. My question is, as a driver of a motor vehicle, because there is so much choice provided to the other mode of travel, how are you to anticipate what your compatriots on the road are planning to do or not do? I have one of these crossovers in my ward, and I get a lot of complaints about it. So I'm trying to understand. It's great to accommodate cyclists. I have no problem doing that. How are we ensuring that we're not creating a conflict that doesn't already exist?
Yeah. So certainly we expect the majority of cyclists to be using those two-stop controlled crossings, either in the green box on the red or the far side. We think lesser numbers of cyclists would be doing that weaving motion, and it would be reminding very relatively slow speed movements for vehicles and bikes that would be happening. So we're not anticipating a conflicts in this site-specific design.
Okay. Following up on the line of questioning Councillor Fleury had on project timing and costs, etc., I left my copy of the report on the other side of the table, but if I recall correctly from page 2 or 3, where it outlines the costs, there are some close to $5 or $6 million in interim costs for the various elements. Is that basically correct?
Over the next few years, we have yes, yeah. $6.4 million.
And so when are we anticipating? The final solution? So when are we anticipating the funding being available for the final complete solution?
The ultimate design with full cycle tracks.
Full thing.
We don't have that information. That'll be dependent on the rest of the section of the bridge. to be renewed, the balance of Albert and Slater to be renewed. So that's where it's the best value for spending is through hitching onto those contracts.
How do we know that that's the best value if you can't tell us when the ultimate solution will be put in place? Because we're spending $6 million between next year and 21 or 22, and then if the next year, bam, we've got $100 million or whatever the final solution is going to cost, we've just thrown out 6. So how do we know it's the best financial solution if we don't know when the ultimate is going to happen?
Because we have ongoing discussions with our colleagues in asset management. So they're aware of this project. We know about their plans for the next 5 years. So we try to coordinate that way. Nobody wants to see funding being thrown out or spent for just 1 year's benefit.
So the ultimate solution is more than 5 years away?
At this point, yes.
Okay. Going back to the removal of parking through, I think you said it was evening and weekend, there was close to 200 spot reduction in on-street parking. You indicated that there was sufficient alternative parking available within the scope of the area. What facilities are you specifically talking about outside of the parking lot here at City Hall?
I'm sorry, I just missed the last part of your question.
You indicated that there was sufficient off-street parking to accommodate the reduction of nearly 200 spots evenings and weekends. You mentioned City Hall as one of those options. Great. What are the other options outside of City Hall to accommodate vehicle parking at night and on the weekend?
Yes, in looking at this, staff took a quick review of just information available on the website, on websites that highlight parking in the downtown, and we noted that other locations that provide free and affordable parking, other than City Hall, would be including the World Exchange Plaza for evening parking and at low cost, free weekend parking. 240 Sparks, basically accessible off Queen Street, provides affordable. And also there's a number of city lots along Albert and Slater which provide affordable and sometimes in some situations free parking. And those are between Kent and Bank and O'Connor.
And do we have numbers to indicate that the combination of those lots has sufficient evening and weekend capacity to accommodate the reduction of 200 free on-street parking spaces?
Yes, we do. Based on recent parking studies, it was determined that in the evening, the availability of unreserved off-street parking is only used to about 20%. We discovered through that same study that weekend parking is only used about 45% of its full potential. And therefore, given an overall of 3,000 spaces, there was more than sufficient to meet any loss of that parking on street during those periods of time.
Do we have recent counts on vehicular traffic through the corridor, AM, PM peak, off-peak weekend, etc.?
Yes, we do.
And is that pre-LRT detours or, recently during the detour process?
Yeah, so certainly we have existing from previous years, and our traffic specialists have forecasted a future, like the post-LRT future,
Sure.
and what the demands will be.
So can that data be shared with council? It would be helpful to have it broken down, AM, PM peak, off-peak weekend, and the year and time of year that those counts were taken. Going back, I would think several years before construction started would be helpful. What is the vehicle reduction anticipated through the downtown as a result of the implementation of LRT? Either as a raw number or as a percentage?
I think staff was nodding that they'll be able to share the information you requested, and I think Phoebe has an answer to your last question.
No.
You're talking about...
We're reducing the vehicle capacity through the core, right? And part of the rationale for that is that more people will be using LRT, and therefore we don't need that capacity. Perfectly reasonable argument. To make that argument, though, you have to know what the capacity is today and how much you think capacity will be reduced when LRT is implemented.
This project, Chair, is not reducing the capacity for car vehicles. We are using the bus lane that will be no longer a dedicated lane for transit for the other.
Can you bring the drawings back up? Because it looked like there was one vehicle lane of traffic in each direction. Was that not?
Let's choose. Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
So this is a typical. Chair, this is a typical location. We're taking a look at Slater Street between Bank and O'Connor.
Sorry, on the bridge.
Oh, on the bridge. Thank you. I'm sorry. More specifically, I'll come to that. Please.
There you go.
Thank you. Presently, on the bridge, there are 2 lanes in each direction.
Yeah.
One lane is the dedicated transit lane. The second lane is a general purpose lane. In the segment between the National Arts Centre and the Rideau Centre crossing, we reduce the transit lane and repurpose it. So the single existing general purpose lane remains in each direction. We also maintain the turn and intersections at a similar scale to what they are at both Elgin and Waller.
Okay. As part of this project, have you looked at the intersections through the core to rationalize the turn movement restrictions that exist today and whether or not they should continue post-implementation of this project?
Yes, through the chair. Traffic capacity and turning. So maybe just a question back. Were you here to hear that? I wouldn't want to repeat myself at the first.
I probably did. I'm not specifically necessarily speaking about capacity. I'm talking about when you get to an intersection and you can't turn right on a red light, and the next intersection you can't turn left, and so you've got to go 6 blocks to make a turn, which seems to me just adds capacity, adds problems downtown and doesn't solve anything.
Right. I'll retrace a little bit what I've said and try to underscore this. It's a really important point. What we were talking about earlier is the function of Albert and Slater, as we know it, is distributing east-west traffic to the north-south streets, and it's a really important part of this plan and part of the recommendation today. So at each intersection, our analysts looked at the level of service for vehicles and all of the other modes, and had a particular eye to the turns that would happen. The result of that analysis, the higher volume turning locations, there's 5 where dedicated turn lanes are being provided. And at every intersection, this plan provides for turns to happen. Now, the final decisions on the regulations at each intersection will be dealt with during the detailed design. Certainly the capacity, the potential physically is built into this recommended plan.
Sure. But I hope, correct me if I'm wrong, it would be safe for a layman to assume that if you're building a left turn lane, you will actually allow vehicles to turn left at that location?
Yes, or right as the case may be. Correct.
Okay. Okay. I'm sure I have more questions, but thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Manette.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A lot of questions have already been answered. There's one that I've wanted to touch on, though, and I believe the Chair had touched on some of it. Consultation, I see at 3 working group meetings, city staff, partner agencies, businesses, community organizations, advocacy groups, public open house, urban design review panel, accessibility advisory committee, and individual meetings with study and area stakeholders. But the 2 local BIAs, when they came up, they both identified that they were not consulted. I know that after their comments, you stated they will be consulted, which is good. But why would they not be consulted through this whole process? Because I think, as you look at the BIAs, I mean, they're the heart of the business community. They know what's happening. They know, how the people, how the businesses react, how they will survive. And when there is meetings, at the very start, they should be one of your first ones to be contacted. So I'd just like to know or be reassured that in the future that it will be contacted and be aggressively part of the process.
Thank you. Chair, we developed the working group as an integrated working group, including internal staff and external stakeholders working together over a period of time. And so we did invite BIAs to participate in the working group, and they would have either directly participated or monitored what the working group was undertaking through the release of minutes, notes, and follow-up documentation. We directly invited the immediately impacted BIA groups, and those who may not have been abutting directly the corridor may very well have been informed through our general announcement of the project through flyers and what we call the buck slip that would have been dropped off to businesses and residents in the area.
Okay, well, I'm not really looking for excuses or anything. I guess what I'm just looking at is reassurances that the presidents of the BIA will be contacted in the future. And the project's a long-term project, and I just want to be assured that they will be part of it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And I think staff are committed to that. I think the point they're trying to make is these were not BIAs that were abutting on the project. So the ones that were directly contacted and involved. Last speaker I have is Councillor McKenney.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to everyone for the discussion this morning. It's always, and to staff, I want to thank you for the work that was put into this through the working group, the meetings. I don't know how many we've had, but it was many. This is one of those projects that, 8-10 years ago, I don't know that I would have really believed it was ever going to happen. And it is a project that will change how we move through the downtown, and that to build a light rail system and to invest billions of dollars in a light rail system. Absolutely, it's to move people around, to give people options in terms of how they travel from their home into the downtown, around the city. But it also gives us a unique opportunity in the downtown to reapportion public space. And, we know today that, there's only so much public space between each building. And up until, very recently, it was, provided for movement by vehicles. And this is a reapportioning of that public space for people, to allow people to certainly cycle east-west across the city. When it's done, you'll be able to come all the way from Churchill into the market very safely on your bike, or anywhere in between, very safely. You can stop off at the new library. You can stop off on Preston. You can continue down into the downtown. You can go to the Rideau Center. And anybody who cycles today on Laurier knows that on a good day, it's almost over capacity. I think I'm a pretty swift cyclist, but there are days when I'm pushed over and people are flying past me. Laurier has got thousands of people every day use those cycle lanes, and I know it was brought up today, and it has been from some residents as well. Is this an opportunity to remove Laurier? And it isn't. We don't, as a city, a growing city, a modern city, we don't remove, bike lanes. We need to add to that capacity. If you're coming in to the downtown and want to go to City Hall, for example, you're not going to take Slater. You're going to take Laurier. If you want to go over, the Laurier Bridge, that's the path that you're going to take. Perhaps Somerset would have been better. Maybe perhaps one day, we will have a bike lane on Somerset. And I don't have the numbers with me, but when we did the safety audit on Laurier, we found that since the segregated bike lanes have been put in place on Laurier, safety has improved, and the number of collisions have been reduced for every user. For pedestrians are safer on Laurier. Cyclists, granted we've had some terrible accidents on Laurier, but cyclists are much, much safer on Laurier today, and so are drivers. Everybody is safer as a result of that infrastructure. So when we look at what we're doing here on Albert and Slater, it will be the same thing. We are making it safer for cyclists. We're giving more space to pedestrians. We want people to take our transit and come into the downtown. When they get off at a station, we want them to have a good experience. We want them to be able to use a patio. We want them to have wide sidewalks. We want them to have safe intersections. In the last 2 days, we've had 2 pedestrians hit in the downtown, one by a bus and this morning another one on Queen Street. We have got to do better for people who are moving around on foot, and this will do that. So I commend you for that. It's also a great opportunity for green space. There's a couple of spots in between Empress and Bay and Bronson, really, where I hope to see new city park. I think that it's one thing we can't do in the downtown is build more green space. So when we have the opportunity, anytime I see the opportunity for green space, it's and that's right across from where the library is going to be. And when we think about the library and how we want people to use the library. There'll be that vista that everyone talks about, obviously looking north, but it's going to be on the south that people are going to come out of the library, and where the real public space and the importance of that public realm will be is out front. So, we need to make sure that we have opportunities for people to walk around, sit, use green space. I just want to, 2 things I just want to bring up. I know Councillor Cloutier is gone, but I'll go and chat with him as well. But I do just want to make one point about that grade and the escarpment, and I've let the library location go. I'm not arguing about the library location here, but the escarpment is still there. Anytime we're asked, what can we do to make cycling or, certainly walking from the library into the downtown a better grade. Sure, getting up onto Albert and Slater perhaps, but the escarpment is south of that, and people live on the escarpment. So just for the record, we are not doing anything here to make the grade from the library to where people live in Centertown better. We're making the grade better for Albert and Slater. So I just want to put that out. But we do have an opportunity with the library to make the south of it a better space and a nicer space. My one concern is trees and the loss of trees. As much as we all love cycling, we all love to walk. We love to breathe even more. Actually, you kind of have to breathe to be able to cycle and walk. So trees are so important in the downtown. Every single day, I have somebody come to me. I did yesterday, and I probably will tomorrow, and here we are today, with a really good reason to remove trees in the downtown. It happens daily. And I think that we have to be vigilant about trees. And there are some about 10-year-old trees lining that up that I want to see relocated. I don't want to see them just taken out. I'll be watching very closely in the detailed design, but especially the trees as we decommission Slater. There are, if we could pull up on the slide, I think it was slide 21. I just want to make the point. The other way, yeah. 21. There it is. So, if you look along on that left, all those trees are lining the wall of Slater, and then on the right, that's it from the other perspective. In some parts of the city, you see that every day. In the downtown, that is not a usual sight. And to lose those trees would be absolutely devastating. So I know there will be some loss of trees. I've asked for a 10-to-1 replacement. Seems a bit much, but last year I had the federal government give me 25-to-1 for 4 trees, so I have set a bit of a precedent there. We need to ensure that we follow our guidelines for compensation for any trees lost. But what's most important is that we work with the NCC, because this is now NCC property, and we don't just remove that wall, remove those trees, have a bit of a field with a few bushes is just not good enough. And I just want to be on record saying that. I know we've had the conversation, but and I have with Mr. Manconi as well. So I just want to make sure that we get that on record. I have one question, and it deals with, it's actually on the last page, traffic and parking bylaw. It's number 43. It's no person operating a vehicle shall pass on the right side of a stopped public transit motor vehicle or a school purpose vehicle that is loading unloading passengers unless it's separated from passing vehicles. Now I know that in this report, so that's a good thing, that if you're cycling, that you don't pass on the right hand side of a bus for safety reasons. But I just wonder why. So it doesn't apply to this corridor because it will be separated out. And the concern is just that that is a citywide bylaw, and this report is more of Rideau Vanier, Somerset. So I just don't know that people were aware of that and that we receive comment on that. I don't know that we've done our due diligence in terms of consulting, and if it wouldn't be better to put that off to another report. Maybe we can have that conversation between now and council. Sorry, it's on the last page of on page 36. Amendment to the Traffic and Bylaw 27301. Add a new subsection about passing.
Yes, this is to align with the latest TAC guidelines, and we just want to make sure that the city's bylaws are aligned with it. That's why this was an opportunity to include it with this project. And you're right, it doesn't affect this project because we have that separation.
But I just, I wonder if we have given people enough opportunity to consult, because I don't know that if you were in another part of the city, so it would affect Main Street, Churchill, not this. And I know that we have to change it. I'm not arguing against it. Just concerned about the ability for people the opportunity for people to consult and to provide comment.
I see your point, but also for this project, this was brought up during consultation as well, and TAC had consultation on their guidelines, although that probably has the attention of technical experts rather than residents. We don't view it as being a difficult bylaw. We don't see that there are anything here that would be disruptive, and it's a safety issue, just making sure that cyclists will not pass on the right unless there's a separation.
Okay. So it was, even though it would have been very technical, part of the consultation for TAC. Okay. Okay, thank you. So those are my comments, and again, I do want to thank staff. I see them all over here, and we've been talking about this for months for the work on this. Thank you.
I want to thank the Vice Chair for her tremendous suggestions, and as usual. And I want to thank staff because a great deal of work has gone into this project, and I know there's been lots of consultation. I know we've had meeting after meeting after meeting, and you kept us well briefed, so I appreciate that. And I'm going to call the vote, and I hope that everybody's able to support this project. Carried? Carried. Okay. The next matter we have on the agenda is item number 2, the all-way stop control at the intersection of Joshua Street and Saddle Ridge Drive. This is Councillor Middick's item, but he's not here, so Councillor Kakish just agreed to introduce it on his behalf. Councillor Kakish.
Thank you, Chair, and it's for all-way stop control at the intersection of Joshua Street and Saddle Ridge Drive.
Thank you very much. We have one speaker on the list, and that's Jeremy Whittet. So the issues arrive, Mr. Whittet, whether you're here to speak as staff or whether you're here to speak as a resident.
I am here to relay the comments on behalf of the Bradley Estates Community Association and the councillor who could not be here today.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of committee. As I mentioned, my name is Jeremy Whittet from the office of Councillor Jody Middick. I'm here today to relay comments in support of the report from the Bradley Estates Community Association and Councillor Jody Middick, who unfortunately could not be here today. The intersection of Joshua and Saddle Ridge are identified as collector roads, and in most cases, sidewalks are provided in the surrounding area. As you'll notice from the staff report, Fountainhead Park is located 135 meters away and is the only local park in the area. Since the construction of that subdivision approximately 8 years ago, a two-way stop on Joshua has existed since its inception. Staff have indicated that after review, that the free flow should exist on the major street and that stop controls exist on the minor street. The community does agree with this. However, given the high level of vehicular traffic, pedestrian and children walking in the area, especially during peak hours, the community has expressed their interest and want for an all-way stop. The community has told the councillor's office that they are concerned about switching the configuration of the existing intersection because of the number of residents who have become accustomed to the stop being on Joshua over the past 8 years. The high level of cut-through traffic experienced by residents has grown over the last few years, with commuters attempting to avoid the traffic queue on Renault Road heading westerly towards Anderson. The community also acknowledges the fact that Chair Egley has indicated the need for a review and a change for the approach of unwanted always stop controls in the next term of council. They've also indicated that in order for committee and council to remain consistent with previous always stop decisions, they respectfully ask that you support the report recommendation as you have in the past with other always stop controls. Happy to answer any questions that committee may have.
Are there any questions for the delegation? Are there any questions I know I have a question for staff. Are there any? So if staff could maybe come to the microphone. So I guess what concerns me about this request is, and I'm looking for clarification from staff, I understand that there is a suggestion or a recommendation by staff that's simple, low cost, that you think will address the situation. I wonder if you can explain for the committee what that suggestion is and why you think it would work better than an all-way stop.
When we did our review of the intersection and the operations at this location, the major street is Joshua Street, and the majority of the traffic is on Joshua Street. With stop control on Joshua, no stop control on Saddle Ridge right now, it's counterintuitive. Operations would improve if we were to provide stop control on the minor street approaches of Saddle Ridge. The south leg of which is a local road, the north leg is a collector, whereas Joshua is a collector through the intersection on both legs. So flipping that would help improve the situation at this location. There are a couple of there's one always stop immediately to the west of this location, and then there is another intersection of Spring Valley, which is about 145 meters to the east of this location. There is more traffic actually coming through that intersection, and at some point that is likely to meet warrants for always stop, but we'll be limited in our ability to implement that at that location, the higher volume location, in the future if we were to implement an always stop at this location where warrants are not met.
I just want to thank you for that explanation, because I think there's a bit of a nuance to this request. Councillor Moffat and Councillor Deans.
Just to clarify, this was something I had in Manitic, Van Vliet, and South River, where we had that. There was a traffic shift, and the process, though, is that you have a two-way stop, and to switch it, you put in a four-way stop for about 6 months, and then you pull the other stop signs, correct?
We put warning signs on advance and let people know that we will be switching it.
But it's like the process calls for a four-way stop to be in there for a specific amount of time, and then it becomes the reverse two-way stop, right? So I think my issue I have with that in my community was that that's almost even more confusing. Is that to the community, you have a two-way stop, then you put in a four-way stop, and then it's a reverse two-way stop. It's a quirky process that I avoided by doing this same thing. I'm not sure the traffic volumes are the same, and what mine was very contained. It was the south end of the island in Mantic, but it's, like I said, it's a bit of a quirky sort of process to create a four-way stop in a community and then to pull two stop signs out and have it reversed. I'll support the report.
Is that in fact what happens?
There is a process in the OTM to switch it out, which provides notification to the residents that the change will be happening. So yes, there's that process. I believe it's a month long that we keep the signs out, so that people are aware of it in advance of the change. We won't just pull them out and then people won't be aware of it. That's the main concern. But there is an established process through the Ontario Traffic Manual that we would follow.
Where you would create a four-way stop for approximately 4.
I'm not 100% sure of the signage requirements at this time, but I can look into it and get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
My question was virtually the same. It was just about how do we ensure the safety of the public at that intersection by switching, because it does create confusion. And I guess I'm just more interested in the kind of signage that would go up in the intervening time so that it was very clear to the public that a change was occurring at that intersection.
Yeah, I can look into that and get back to you, but there is a clear process defined. It's not just an overnight switch.
Okay. And the other intersection that's approaching the warrant, how close is it to the warrant?
I'm not sure what the volume warrant is at the other adjacent intersection, but the volumes are higher, and the development that is going to continue in the area, it's likely that it will meet warrants at a future date.
And how far away is it?
It's 145 meters to the east of this intersection.
So you couldn't put both in?
We couldn't put both in.
Why? Because of the Highway Traffic Manual doesn't
The
allow?
OTM recommends 250 meters between adjacent always stop control. There is an existing one to the west at 240 meters, so that is very close to the 250 meter requirement, but the one to the east is going to be far less than that at 145 meters.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? I just have a quick follow-up based on what Councillor Deans was asking about. So if this got approved and it went in there, and then the intersection where you think a four-way is going to meet warrants sooner, how difficult would it be for you then, and what would the process be to remove the four-way that may go in after this vote and put in the other one.
Sorry, so you're suggesting if we put one in at this location, then we remove it?
What I'm saying is you've indicated that there are two intersections right now, one where there's a four-way and one where you think there's going to be a need for a four-way in the not-too-distant future, that the numbers are closer. But because of the putting it in, you don't have enough space. You've got 145 where you need 250. Is there a process to pull out the one that we may approve today and put in the one where you think it's going to be necessary? And if so, what is that process?
There's a similar process in the OTM to remove all-way stop and convert it to a two-way stop condition. There would be signage, advanced warning sign, a month in advance to let people know that the change is going to occur at this location. I'm not sure that there would be public buy-in, though, to remove an all-way stop at this location if we were to install one and then remove it.
And that's my concern if you think it really should be somewhere else. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. This is not cut and dry, and we have already gone down the slope, and I'm not going to bring that back up in terms of the four-way stops. But I do, if we're looking at a case where there's where the warrants will be met, therefore there really is a safety issue, just over 100 meters away, and we just don't. I don't have enough information today. There's too much coming back. At this point, I think I would dissent because I don't have the information that we need to make the decision. So I'm going to suggest that we maybe defer this till the next Transportation Committee and come back with the information that was asked of staff. I don't know if that's open to the councillor or.
No, it's certainly open for you to bring that motion, and then comments would shift to comments or questions on deferral.
Okay.
I would be certainly happy to support your motion of deferral. Any questions or comments on the deferral motion? Councillor Floyd?
Yes. These have come up to committee many times. There's, in my mind, two issues to the process. One, which is the warrant system, which we're all uncomfortable with. There are local priorities that we as councillors are elected for and we want to improve. And unfortunately, the warrant system's killing us. So something's not working on that regards. And then there's the other piece, which we all have to be honest about, which is when a project or a subdivision is approved at planning, and we also approve the transportation elements of it, there are issues that we're not resolving that are coming back to us at Transportation Committee, and that we as a city end up paying for. So, I'm not on Planning Committee. I see Mr. Willis is here, and I know that some of the members of the committee are sitting on Planning Committee. We have to put a serious consideration that some of the measures that we're putting in out of our $40,000 a year, traffic calming and others, are because of poor transportation planning design off the initial process. So it's a red flag that as we review it for next term, there's a planning approval arm that needs to factor into this. And then there's the warrant system, which generally works, but doesn't work in local situations. So I would be much more comfortable in giving staff and the councillor's office the authority to go and work it out, because I hate...
Councillor, this is on deferral, eh?
Yeah, so I would oppose that just to clarify. I'd like to clarify, if we are comfortable with today's vote, do we give the authority to staff and the community and councillors to go and implement something that works for that community? I don't want to see it back on the floor of committee. I think it is for that community and staff to resolve. It's on the floor of committee because we put the handcuffs on warrants. I'd love to find an alternative so that community could work through that issue.
Okay, I'm not sure what that says to deferral, though.
So I'm not in support of deferral if we can give the authority to staff and the councillor's office to come up with a solution.
We can't do that, so it's either supported or deferred and get more information about the process and then make a more informed decision down the road. Well, Councillor Codry wanted to speak to deferral.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And, I would support deferral only based on the fact that we may not have all the information. The problem with this item or similar items to this in every community that I'm aware of is the issue of the warrants, which is a different discussion than today. Today we're talking about this particular item. As much as I want to have all the information, as Councillor McKenney mentioned, to make that decision going forward. So I will support deferral.
And it's a shame that Mr. Manconi had to leave the meeting early because we need to continue to have that discussion around warrants, and of course he's in charge of the whole transportation group. So I will commit to passing on to him the discussion that we're having here today about that and see where we're going with that. But Councillor Minette, I think, wants to speak to deferral.
I will not support the deferral. I believe that in the report you read Councillor Mittick's comments, and it's very clear that as a ward councillor, he is concerned about the safety of the residents and feels that the proposal in place will alleviate a lot of the concerns. The community association, it's in the comments, also states that they are in support of this motion. In the past, we've always followed what the ward councillor proposes. I don't know why we're looking at changing it at this point, but as far as the vote on deferral, I will not support it.
Okay, thank you for that. On deferral, I think Councillor Chernyshenko and then Councillor Moff and then Councillor Kakish.
I will support deferral. I wouldn't have. My first comment when this came up was, why would I suddenly choose to draw a line in the sand here and say I'm going to vote against this one when I've voted against all the others that have come in front of us, even though we, quote, shouldn't have, and we do have to have a more fundamental review of why we do that. But what came up in this discussion was the issues around I understand why the community association, ward councillor are in favor of it, but what I don't fully understand is what is this going to prevent in the future if making that switch to an intersection where it would be more important and possibly increase safety even more. It just seems to me that a situation that's existed for a long time, the extra weeks to understand it better and have Mr. Manconi's feedback as well would serve us well. It's not a vote against. It's just saying I really, deferral. Thank you.
Councillor Moffat.
Thanks. This is somewhat on deferral, although I was going to jump in with a comment earlier and then I got cut off with the deferral motion. So let's just pretend that I'm on deferral. So no, I'm joking.
And we'll just see what you have to say.
The reason why I wouldn't support deferral, and to the point I was going to make, is that in the situation I mentioned, and not that I'm the be-all end-all on always stop control process, but in our case we had two side by side, and we had a three-way stop and we had a two-way stop. The community wanted a four-way stop at this other spot. What we did was we worked with the community to get support for removal of the three-way stop and then the creation of the four-way stop. Because of the compliance issues, the community was aware that the three-way stop was less than, there was no compliance at it virtually. So the adding of a four-way stop was just going to reduce that compliance. So the support was there to remove the always stop control at one intersection in favor of another, because it was going to make the entire situation safer. Having two side by side was going to be less safe because of the compliance. And we have the data to prove that. I think what I would suggest, instead of deferring, is I would direct staff to, when that time comes, when you're coming to a point where you're going to be looking at the always stop control on the other intersection, you work with the council's office, try to work with the community with that data in place to say why the two side by side are not safe, and go with the one over the other, because I think that would be better for the community as a whole.
Thank you. Councillor Kakish.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted a point of clarification. What information are we going to get as a result of deferring this that we don't have now? I think Councillor McKenney asked for that, so to you or to staff, what information?
Well, I was actually going to speak to that.
Okay.
And I think what we need to hear from staff are the following. First of all, what the process is to give notice in terms of signage and the amount of time that type of signage and how long that signage stays up. And also, I think we need to hear more information about this, and I'm sorry, I forget the intersection, where you think it's going to be necessary sooner rather than later based on the warrants, what the numbers are in and around that particular intersection and your rationale as to why you think it's going to be necessary there. And I think probably just a memo to all members of and the process for removing, yes, if we go down that road. In other words, we put it in and then we decide we have to take it out because the other intersection reaches warrants as you believe it will. And perhaps we could do that by way of a motion to all committee members before the next committee meeting, so we'll have the information in front of us. Councillor Deans.
Well, this might be just taking it a bit too far, but could we also ask you to comment on would there be a better long-term solution for those two intersections, like maybe making one giant traffic circle to incorporate both, or even a figure-8 traffic circle that would deal with it, because it might be that there is a better solution than those stop controls.
I'm not sure that we could do that evaluation prior to the council meeting coming up.
No, we're suggesting be deferred to the next committee meeting, so that would be a month.
Committee meeting. Okay.
So I don't know if that helps you or not.
I would have to confer with my colleagues in the traffic management group to determine whether or not that's feasible. There's
It might be outside the scope of what you can do, and that's fine, but I've just seen it in other places, and this may be an area where there's DCs involved, and so you might want to look for a better longer-term solution than short-term ones where you're putting them in, taking them out.
So perhaps as a compromise, the memo can either say outside the scope of what we're able to achieve, or, to Councillor Dean's point, here's a suggestion. Does that work? Before the next committee meeting? Mm-hmm. Okay. So on deferral then, we need everybody in their seat for the vote. Councillor? Councillor Fleury? We're going to vote on deferral. And since we've had a mixed opinion, I guess we should do yeas and nays.
Okay. Councillor Chernushenko?
Yes.
Councillor DeRuse?
No.
Councillor Deans?
Yes.
Councillor Fleury?
No.
Councillor Medic? Councillor Moffat?
No.
Councillor Manette?
No.
Councillor Kadri?
Yes.
Councillor Kakish?
No.
Councillor McKinney?
Yes.
And Chair Egley?
Yes.
It was a tie, so it lost.
Okay. So we'll call the vote then on the main report, and I guess again we'll go with the yeas and nays. Or is it the same vote? Same vote, so then it tie. Well, no, that's what I'm saying. Yeas and nays then.
Councillor Chernushenko?
Roll the dice. For lack of information, no.
Councillor DeRuse?
Yes.
Councillor Deans?
No.
Councillor Fleury?
Yes.
Councillor Moffat?
Yes.
Councillor Manette?
Yes.
Councillor Kadri?
Yes.
Councillor Kakish?
Yes.
Councillor McKinney?
No.
And Chair Egley?
No.
So it was 6-4.
All right, that's carried. Are there any notices of motion for consideration of the subsequent meeting? Any inquiries? Oh, I thought I had. Oh, sorry. roll it back. So I gave notice of a motion on March the 7th. Therefore, be it resolved, the Transportation Committee recommends that the Council direct the General Manager of PIED to forward a letter to the Ontario Ministry of Environment and Climate Change requesting that the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change, 1, takes immediate steps to expedite the response process for Part 2 orders or bump-up requests as part of the Section 61 review to improve MCEA process times and reduce costs, and 2, supports changes to better integrate and harmonize the MCEA process with processes defined under the Planning Act, and 3, amends the scope of MCEA reports and studies to reduce duplication with existing public processes and decisions made under municipal official plans and provincial legislation. I understand from Mr. Wills that they've managed to work out a solution outside of the committee process, so we won't be voting on that motion today, but I'll be withdrawing it. So now inquiries, and I believe first is Councillor McKinney.
Thank you, Chair. I have 2. They're short, so. The first is, can staff provide a plan to facilitate pedestrian safety and comfort at intersections next to all of our new LRT stations? And, that could include advanced pedestrian signals, but I'm looking for all measures that will make pedestrian movements at those intersections safer. The second is with respect to sidewalk reconstruction. What are the city's standards for vehicle crossings of sidewalks, and what processes are in place to ensure that these are followed in city-led projects and private developments which result in the reconstruction of our city-owned sidewalks?
Thank you. Councillor Deans, I believe, has an inquiry.
Thank you. As a result of federal regulatory changes to the type of paint allowed on our roadways, concerns have been raised about the quality of pavement markings across the city. Many residents have noted that line markings are fading much more quickly, and staff are unable to keep up with service requests for repainting. Understanding that we are required to use low VOC paint for regulatory compliance, what measures have staff considered to address this situation? In particular, are we tracking the impact of the new paint requirements on our operations and budgets? Have staff done a cost analysis of painting more frequently or switching to a more durable product? How many complaints, requests have staff received on the quality of line painting in the city? Have any additional funds been allocated in recent budgets to address this issue? As well, the safety of our residents is paramount, and we need to ensure that our roadways are safe. Could staff please outline if any safety concerns have been identified as a result of fading pavement markings, and are there any liability issues for the City of Ottawa? Finally, could staff please provide a breakdown of what would be required, as well as the impact to the roads operations budget if we were to increase the frequency of refreshing all of our pavement markings?
Any other inquiries? Okay, seeing none. Adjournment? Carried. Thank you.